November 7, 1943. Bougainville. The night sky above Empress Augusta Bay was moonless, the sea dark and deceptively calm. Out beyond the surf, Japanese destroyers crept through the black water in radio silence. Aboard them were nearly 500 infantrymen of the 53rd Regiment, veterans of campaigns in China and New Guinea. Their commanders believed they were about to strike a decisive blow, an ambush that would drive the Americans from their fragile foothold on Bougainville's western shore. The plan was simple and, on paper, elegant. They would slip behind the marine lines under the cover of darkness, form a blocking position near the beaches, and crush the U.S. perimeter in a coordinated pincer attack by dawn. Every tenet of Japanese doctrine promised success. Surprise, aggression, and the night itself, all traditional weapons of the Imperial Army, seemed aligned in their favor. The American positions inland were known to be thin, established only days earlier after the landings at Koromokina. Intelligence briefings described disorganized troops and incomplete defenses. Japanese staff officers saw the perfect opportunity to strike fast, trap the enemy between converging forces, and destroy them before reinforcements could arrive. But on the opposite side of the bay, inside a damp, low-roofed command post, Major James Wilson of the U.S. 3rd Marine Division was not asleep. The Marines had learned to expect the unexpected. Their field telephones hummed with constant reports from patrols scattered along the jungle approaches. When a forward observer on Puruwata Island radioed sighting of multiple barges moving through the darkness, Wilson was already hunched over his map table. The coordinates formed a pattern he recognized instantly, an enemy landing behind their main line. It was 0015 hours when the full report arrived. 12, possibly 15 barges were landing near Koromokina Lagoon. Roughly 500 men, heavily armed, moving inland through mangroves. Wilson's reaction was methodical, almost routine. He marked new symbols on his map and gave the order to initiate pre-registered artillery fires. The Marines had rehearsed this scenario for months. They called it defense in depth, a doctrine built on rapid communication and flexible fire support. The Japanese had no idea that the Americans had mapped every likely landing site, every approach trail through the jungle, and every clearing suitable for attack. While the Japanese destroyers turned back to sea, their cargo of infantry was already under silent observation. Trip flares were armed, range tables set, guns waiting. By the time the first wave of Japanese soldiers splashed ashore, thinking they had caught the enemy asleep, the U.S. Marines were fully awake and ready to answer as the first Japanese platoons pushed inland. Their boots sank into the soft, waterlogged soil of Bougainville's coastal jungle. The air was thick with mist and the smell of salt. Moving in columns, the soldiers advanced silently, guided only by compasses and the dim glow of phosphorescent moss on tree trunks. Their officers believed they were still undetected. But hidden deep in the jungle ahead, the Americans had already drawn invisible lines of death. At 0025 hours, the 12th Marines opened fire. Their 75mm pack howitzers, dug into camouflaged gun pits 2 miles inland, began walking shells across the lagoon. The first rounds bracketed the landing area perfectly, erupting in blinding flashes that turned night into chaos. From the beach came confusion and panic. Men stumbled, shouting orders that no one could hear over the scream of incoming fire. Barges were smashed apart where they grounded, ammunition crates ignited, and machine guns toppled into the surf. The Japanese tried to scatter into the jungle, but their every path had already been anticipated. American observers, connected by radio to their gun batteries, adjusted fire within seconds. Each artillery correction fell closer, tighter, until the entire shoreline was a maelstrom of explosions. The supposed ambush had become a slaughter zone. From his command post, Major Wilson watched the reports flow in, his face illuminated by the glow of a red-lensed map lamp. To the Japanese, the Americans' reaction must have seemed instantaneous. In truth, it was the result of doctrine, weeks of drills, rehearsals, and the luxury of superior communication. Each Marine company possessed direct radio contact with artillery, mortars, and neighboring platoons. Every field gun had pre-calculated fire tables for likely enemy landing zones. The entire defensive network could pivot within minutes, focusing overwhelming firepower on any point under threat. Sergeant Herbert Thomas, positioned along the inner perimeter, could feel the concussions rippling through the ground as the bombardment intensified. His men lay prone, rifles ready, eyes fixed on the blackness beyond the treeline. When the artillery lifted, the next phase began. Machine guns chattering in interlocking arcs that cut down the survivors attempting to push inland. The Japanese fought with characteristic resolve, crawling forward through mud and debris, only to be stopped by trip flares that burst open and revealed their silhouettes. The Marines fired methodically, not in panic, but in calm precision. They had turned defense into an exact science, every movement choreographed, every shot deliberate. By 0100 hours, the beachhead behind the Marine lines had become a charnel ground of shattered barges and burning palm trees. The Japanese ambush had already failed, and the battle had only just begun. By 0200 hours, the Japanese rear attack force was fighting blind. The jungle, meant to shield their movement, now trapped them in narrow corridors where every step risked contact with Marines who knew the terrain better than any map. Captain Isamu Akamatsu, leading what was left of his first wave, tried to rally scattered platoons along a shallow ridge inland from the lagoon. His men had been trained for night assaults, taught to rely on aggression and momentum. But on Bougainville, that doctrine was turning against them. Every time a group of Japanese soldiers tried to regroup, mortar rounds fell with unnerving precision. The Marines had spent weeks registering potential kill zones, mapping each depression and ridge line. When an observer spotted muzzle flashes, he called in coordinates through an SCR-300 radio. Within seconds, another storm of artillery descended. The darkness that had been the Japanese Army's ally throughout the Pacific now belonged entirely to the Marines. Sergeant Thomas's squad was positioned along one of the interior trails leading toward the main perimeter. Through the dense undergrowth, he could see flashes of movement, shadows darting between trees. His men held their fire until the enemy closed to within 50 yards. Then Thomas gave a short, sharp order. The jungle erupted in a deafening burst of automatic fire. Tracer rounds lanced through the blackness, cutting down the front ranks of an advancing Japanese section. The survivors fell to the ground, seeking cover in a shallow depression, one that had been pre-registered earlier that day. Thomas picked up his handset, spoke a single code word, and seconds later, a rain of 60mm mortar shells detonated over the hollow. The entire firefight lasted less than 3 minutes. When it ended, nothing moved except leaves drifting in the air. Thomas exhaled, wiped the grime from his face, and began shifting his squad to new positions. He knew another wave would come. Further north, Private Robert Carter's machine gun section had become a critical anchor point. His M19 19.30 caliber gun spat controlled bursts at any flicker of motion. Spent casings piled at his knees. When a Japanese officer tried to organize a countercharge, Carter's fire cut through the leading men before they reached the edge of his field of vision. He didn't know it yet, but that officer was Captain Akamatsu himself, the man who had led the entire landing. By 0330 hours, Japanese coordination had completely broken down. Units were isolated, communications severed, and ammunition nearly gone. The Marines' network of firepower, artillery, mortars, machine guns, functioned like a living organism, adapting in real time to every threat. The rear ambush that had promised glory now lay in ruins. When dawn began to glow faintly through the canopy at 0500 hours, what remained of the 53rd Infantry huddled in bomb craters and waterlogged trenches. They had expected to trap the Marines, but now, surrounded, cut off, and exhausted, it was they who were trapped. The first light of November 8th revealed what the night had hidden. Smoke drifted through the mangroves. The lagoon shimmered with oil slicks from shattered barges. Dozens of lifeless bodies lay where the surf met the sand, tangled with burned equipment and twisted rifles. The attack that had been planned as a precise ambush was now nothing but wreckage. Major Wilson stepped from his command post just after sunrise. The air was still thick with the acrid smell of cordite. His operations officer handed him a fresh situation report. Enemy resistance had collapsed. Marine patrols moving through the jungle found only small, disorganized groups of Japanese soldiers, most wounded, some too shocked to fight. The 12th Marines had fired more than 400 rounds during the engagement. The 3rd Defense Battalion's 90mm guns had joined the barrage, their craters marking the final resting places of entire enemy squads. Sergeant Thomas, his left arm bandaged and uniform shredded, oversaw the evacuation of wounded men from his sector. He refused medical evacuation, claiming his men needed leadership more than he needed rest. For hours, he coordinated security and casualty collection, still issuing calm orders as stretcher-bearers moved past him. Later, his actions would earn him the Medal of Honor. But for now, he was just another exhausted Marine in a battle that had tested every lesson the Corps had learned since Guadalcanal. Private Carter's machine gun team followed the patrols clearing the landing zone. Their gun barrel was warped from the night's firing, but still hot to the touch. Around their dugout lay the evidence of their work: spent casings, ruptured helmets, and the silent forms of men who had charged into their overlapping fields of fire. The terrain was littered with fragments of Japanese grenades, torn webbing, and fallen banners that had once carried the rising sun. When Marine intelligence officers began counting enemy casualties, the scale of the defeat became clear. More than 230 dead were confirmed, with trails of blood leading deeper into the jungle where others had been dragged away. Fewer than 100 Japanese soldiers made it back toward friendly lines. Not a single barge survived. By noon, organized resistance had ceased entirely. The lessons from Bougainville were immediate and unmistakable. Japanese night assault doctrine, once their greatest advantage, had collapsed in the face of American communication, coordination, and precision fire support. Radios had replaced runners. Pre-registered artillery had replaced guesswork. Where the Japanese relied on courage and momentum, the Marines relied on systems that worked flawlessly under pressure. Historians would later call the engagement one of the most perfect defensive actions of the Pacific War. It proved that the era of surprise night attacks was over. Firepower, coordination, and technology had rewritten the rules of warfare. By the time the tropical sun climbed high above Empress Augusta Bay, Major Wilson stood at the edge of the battlefield, staring at the smoking remains of the beach. The Japanese had come believing they would ambush the Marines in their sleep. Instead, they had awakened a machine of war that never truly slept, and by dawn, it had erased them. Discover more untold moments of the Pacific War, where strategy, courage, and technology collided to decide history. If you found this story compelling, make sure to subscribe for more true battlefield documentaries that uncover how ordinary men faced extraordinary odds. Leave a comment below telling us which World War II battle or weapon you'd like explored next. And don't forget to like the video if you want more stories of Marines, soldiers, and sailors who changed the course of the war before sunrise.